Hello and welcome to today's episode of Her Mastermind. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth and inspire others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, and thank you for joining us today on this episode of Her Version. The Her Version platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I am speaking with an amazing woman named Sunshine Griffith. When you think sunshine, you think everything happiness. And although Sunshine is full of a vibrancy, her life growing up was not always that way. Growing up in poverty, exposed to alcoholism, abuse, and homelessness by the age of 13, she has not let her story go in vain. She is now an advocate for adolescent suicide prevention and has written a program for peer mentoring. As an executive life and business coach, Sunshine helps those struggling to bring health and wellness from painful past traumas. A global thought leader and speaker, she thrives in helping others to overcome their pain and shift their mindset from victim to victor. She believes that every past has a purpose, and I am so excited to hear more about her past and her purpose. Welcome, lady.
Hi.
How do you like that intro?
I loved it. It's kind of surreal to hear about yourself from someone else.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm like, oh, I want to meet. Yes. Thank you.
Did you just say you want to meet this person?
Yeah, I know. It's funny when you hear yourself. I'm like, it's so normal to us, our life, that sometimes when someone echoes it back to us, I'm like, okay, all right. Or even speaks back my words to me. I'm like, okay, I received that.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I just had Maureen on yesterday, and we were talking about how she was reading through some of her book. And she's like, I was reading through it, and I was thinking to myself, I am so smart. I was like, I do that too sometimes. Well, I'll reread some of my stuff that I have out, and I'll be like, wow, that is freaking brilliant.
Right?
Yeah, we don't give each other enough credit sometimes, or ourselves enough credit sometimes.
Yeah. I had somebody this morning, we were talking and we were talking about our talents that people don't know about us. And he said he didn't have talents. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, you do. You just think they're normal. For you, that's normal. And everyone else is like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So when I noticed when and why I decided to speak out and be an influencer and share my stories, because as I begin to tell people, they're like, that's not normal thinking. I'm like, no, but doesn't everybody think this way? No. So I was asked to speak a few places, and I'm like, really? Is it that different? And I realized I was different, and the way I grew up and started to begin to pull apart, my upbringing and where I came from, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I did pick that up along the way, and I did. When we overcome things and we gain knowledge, there's wisdom in it, and someone is just in it and they've not overcome that yet. And when you speak that, they can grab onto it and find a way out. So I found that really, really important in sharing. If we all share, boy, none of us would be stuck.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And that's
So,
part of why I run this podcast, is because of that. It's like, where's the platform so that we can share our story? Like, it's not like we're just walking around just telling people our backstory. You know?
it's true. I meet people and they're like, oh, and they think I've had this perfect upbringing, and even in the church, and they have no idea. And then when I say, oh, I'll talk to this person, they talk about a problem they've had, and I'm like, oh, I can speak into that. And then they're like, wait, what? You know? And so a little bit about that, I'll share a little background. So I grew up in poverty in a small town in Northeast Ohio, near Youngstown. And I had a mom that worked all the time, single parent, left us to be raised by babysitters, boyfriends that brought in a lot of abuse and trauma. She had married 5 times, looking for love. One of them was my own father. And then when I had realized I was writing all these things down, I had 26 different addresses. So I've moved 26 times. And with her working in the bar, started my life with a Shirley Temple in my hand, talking to the guy on the bar stool next to me. And that was normal, taking naps in booths until her shift was over. My grandma came to pick me up. And then when she had married her 4th husband, he really didn't want any more kids. So I was out. And that's when I began to really start to try and stay with friends. I moved in with an abusive boyfriend as a teenager. And that really began my life on the streets. I slept in cars and people's driveways if they were open, especially a lot of my friends. I'm like, hey, have your parents' car open, and then I'll still catch the bus for school. So nobody would know. I'd live in, I slept in tents in the woods. I slept in a tent behind a bar that my friend's mom worked at because I knew she was there and I felt safe. I wouldn't even do that today. I think of some of the places, boarded up buildings in Youngstown. I started to stay as late as I could at bars because they were open. So I began to learn to play pool. And I got really good and started hustling for money. So they're like, this little girl can't beat me. So it was a way to make money. And then I still went to school every day, trying to hide that and protect my mom, And so then I began really kind of spiraling down, that aloneness and being on the street. Failed suicide attempts, cutting. I started smoking cigarettes, marijuana. I started drinking so I could fit in with the other people that were there. It was the thing to do to cope. And so I kind of learned that from them. So I had a lot of learning of things that I had to unlearn over my life. And a friend's dad that owned a bar, I began to play pool there and kind of hang out all the time. And I could sneak, alcohol into my soda and no one would notice, and, try and be this grown up and still talking to the guy on the bar stool next to me. That was normal. And then I began to date a gentleman that was in a band at 16. He was 21 and he was an atheist. And I didn't know that was the pathway for me to find Christ and my faith through his mother. He had a Christian mom and I wanted a mom. So we dated a couple years. She never pressed religion, nothing like that. She had a mother-daughter banquet and said, well, I have 3 sons. How about you go with me? And I did not know what was going to happen. So I was like, I wanted a mom. And I'm like, sure. So I went, and it wrecked me that somebody would love me, that somebody wanted me, just to learn about faith, that I was that important and that I wasn't second rate or damaged, or, that I was loved. And so I began to go to church. And then not long after, it was Easter. And when I learned that Jesus died for me at that church, then that wrecked me more. I'm like, somebody would die. I'm like, oh, I don't want them to die, And I ran up to the front. I laid on the steps, and I'm like 19 years old at this point. And they're like, do you believe? I'm like, I need this Jesus person that would die for me. I want him. And I said, I don't know how to live. It was almost like an instant download from heaven that there was right and wrong. I didn't realize I was abused. Didn't realize that those kinds of things, being beaten that way, or locked in rooms, or darkness, or, I had a babysitter that, tried to drown me. And she just kept telling me I was dirty. Like all of those things, I put that blanket of shame on that day and felt like I was not enough. And so when I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know how to live. And so that's where a shift began. And I thought, you know what, I could be different. I began living for God. Honestly, I was like, I owe him my life. If he died for me, I began to honestly lose my selfishness. Everything was for gain. I could manipulate. I could get what I wanted because I was on the streets and I had to survive. And then I realized, wow, and I'm looking at everyone else in the same position. I'm like, they don't know him. So there's me again at the bar. No one discipled me. I didn't know. I was still going to the bar, but I was saved, right? And I'm telling the guys next to me, I'm like, hey, I'll drive tonight because if we wreck, I'm going to heaven. You want to go too? And just the simple mentality of faith. I started sharing immediately. I'm like, you don't have to feel this way. You don't have to be alone. And I actually began to pay attention in school and I ended up graduating a first generation high school graduate. No one in my family had graduated. And so that began, such a change. And then I realized I didn't want to be with an atheist anymore. And his mom's like, wait, you're not supposed to leave my son. And I said, well, I got Jesus. And so it was just so special. She's still like a mother to me today. I still see her. And so she was a major, major godsend in my life. And, you think everything's going to be perfect. Well, no. So even though I was a Christian and I start thinking I'm like, oh, I'm protected. I can pray. I can do all these things. I was still going to the bar and I ended up being so drunk I couldn't drive home. And my friend gave this guy in the bar my keys, and I ended up getting violated by him. And at that moment, I just stopped, thought, I'll just get married. I think I had all the plans and ideas. I married a best friend of mine and thought, I won't have to be alone. I won't have to put myself in that situation. I'll love him that way. And within 6 months, I'm like, what am I doing? Trauma can really make you make bad decisions. But here I am saying, making excuses, saying, well, I was a street kid. What do you expect? I don't know what I'm doing. And I felt God in my spirit say, no, you're a beautiful, holy woman of God. And I was trying to justify bad behavior, just because of my past. I was using that victim mindset to still keep making bad choices. And so I went through divorce at 19. And, then I just continued to realize, when I did that, it kind of hit me that people were replaceable in my life. Things stayed with me. I carried books and things. And when I moved on the street, everything stayed with me, never lost anything. But it was people that were replaceable. So I learned that lesson that, well, there'll be more people, right? And it was such a big thing I had to unlearn, to allow even unconditional love. I was setting up conditions, expecting people to abandon me, and so through that, I ended up starting to work. I thought, okay, got to get back on the track. And I was praying every day for salvation because I thought I lost it if I would sin. It's so sweet and simple when you think about the innocence of that. But, and so I ended up this will tie into where I'm at now. I went to college for about 15 months, graduated early with an associate degree in business. I was able to get contracted into Delphi, automotive there back home. And they couldn't hire me full time because I didn't have my degree. And they were under General Motors at the time. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got this big job. I'm not finishing school. I bought a trailer for $4,000, had a home. I was not homeless anymore. I was able to buy a car, first new car, very excited, right? And then the contracts ended. I'm like, well, wait, but I have this, all of these things. I'm like, and so they couldn't hire me because I didn't have that degree. And so it's funny because now I came back to my first love, and that comes into, at this moment, I've been 6 weeks with General Motors, and I was hired in as a business intelligence analyst. So it brought back it still brings healing to those parts of my past where I didn't feel good enough. I was never good enough because I didn't have that degree. And I finally just finished it this year, but it took me, a lot of years. I had to start over. And so I thought that was a really neat thing when I was thinking about things today, that that's where my first job was. And that began this thing of, you know, still couldn't get direct hired. So I still felt not good enough. I always felt a little less than. And I couldn't love myself from my past or where I was from. And so that was a cool thing I connected today. And so then I met someone, of course, at work, and he was the first Christian I dated. So I thought it'd be great to marry another Christian. Thought everybody believed everything I did because of the name, right? But we had about 15 years of marriage and my 3 children. And, you know, all of my abandonment past still came in. There was still brokenness. There was still addictions that came in on both sides. Sin entered in, and we ended up divorcing. And, you know, at that moment, you know, I was so just distraught. I thought, well, I thought Christians are supposed to have this great life, and I had this new start, and I had all these things, but I was still in a poverty mindset. You know, that's one of the biggest things when you grow up in poverty and you're in survival mode. I didn't know how to turn that off. And, you know, I kept trying to make it. I thought, well, and if I would get a glimpse of somebody leaving, you know, I would pull away and I would try and leave first. I'm like, I'm not going to be the one left, right? So, you know, these things that I had to unlearn about, you know, people being replaceable. And so I'm sitting there in church and I'm broken. I'm thinking, what in the world, right? Why am I here? And the pastor said, you know, if, he says, you know, do you anybody not have a father's love? And I'm like, you know, I don't know my dad. I don't really know him. I've had these terrible abusive fathers, alcoholics, and I said, you know, and they said, stand up so we can pray for you. I'm like, I am not standing up. And I start bawling. And the lady next to me, she's like, honey, I think you should stand up. I'm like, I'm not standing up. You stand up. And this little rebellious girl starts coming out. And I'm like, I don't need it. And I'm crying. And I finally, you know, I was like, okay, fine. This is dumb. I'm thinking this in my head. And I stand up. And I felt like in my spirit, you know, I felt like God saying, you know, what men and women have done to you in the past, you're not giving me your whole heart. And if you have your heart's broken in all these pieces, and you have your watch was broken, you took it to the manufacturer, you took it to the creator, you didn't take it to the baker to fix. He's like, who made your heart? And I'm like, oh, he's like, you're keeping parts of yourself from me. He said, give me the whole thing so I can make you whole. Because these things are still coming up. You've got this brokenness. You're trying to move forward, and I'm like, that's terrible. I'm not doing that, you know. And I'm fighting with God in this moment. People are praying. I don't even know what they're saying. I'm just crying, thinking that, you know, this is terrible. And I finally said, fine, you can have my stupid heart. And I tell you what, at that moment, you know, he said, you don't only represent yourself, but you represent everyone in the room that's afraid to stand up. And I thought, okay, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to give you everything. I won't hold anything back. And, you know, and he said, there's a root of abandonment that we're going to need to pull and do some spiritual surgery. We're going to reach in there and pull that out, and it's not going to feel good. You're going to be like an open wound, and we're going to do that. So I just felt like I had to surrender and say, you know what, I don't want that. Sift me and take anything out that I've not looked at and not given up. And that root of abandonment, and I felt like it was like as a plant, like they grow the vines around your heart, around your eyes, around your mind. I was bound by that thing. I felt like he pulled it out. I'm all bleeding, and, you know, and he's like, okay, I'm going to bind you up and make you whole. You gave me your heart. You've taken out this root, and we're going to make some changes. And I'm going to teach you how to love not only everyone else and see them like I do, but yourself, and without condition, you know. And I'm like, okay.